Hi, everyone, and happy Friday. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us here today as we talk about some important stuff. If you're anything like me, as you followed along with the unfolding strike by Dominion workers and the way that they were treated throughout that whole thing, and then the way it ended with, first of all, being pushed we were almost a month before Christmas when things were finally settled. It ended up being kind of the same deal that was offered when they started the whole process. But then the kind of just the mistreatment of being offered Dominion cards as a signing bonus. And then the very next day, shareholder dividends going up. It was just, to me, you felt so dirty about it all, and you felt like anger. I was angry, and so my first instinct was, I'm never shopping at Dominion again. But then I quickly realized that's not a sensible solution to anything, because if I do that, if a lot of people do that, well, then the people who will really suffer the most are Dominion workers who you're trying to stand in solidarity with. And so as I was struggling in my brain to think, what could I do? What could we do? And I wondered, who could help? Who do we know at St. Mark's that could help us do something meaningful for struggling, low-waged workers in Newfoundland and Labrador? And then it dawned on me, Mark Nichols, who we know as Father Mark Nichols, former associate priest here at St. Mark's and still current St. Mark's member, parishioner here, and who has been working for the last several months with the 15 and Fairness campaign here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so I thought we should reach out to Mark and see if there's anything that we at St. Mark's, really also the wider Christian Anglican community, could do that could help low-wage workers in our province. So Mark, thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. And so I'm going to start off with a question. And the question is, can you tell us about the 15 and Fairness campaign and what it's all about?
Well, thank you, Rob. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity. The Fight for 15 and Fairness Newfoundland and Labrador campaign is part of a broader movement across North America. This campaign didn't start here. This is just a provincial expression of that campaign. And I think, we have, as a campaign, been very supportive of the Dominion workers while they were on strike, and obviously very disappointed with the outcome of that strike. But we want to stress to people that Dominion workers are not the only ones who work under those labor conditions. Things are no different at the other grocery retailers or other retailers. Now 50%, just over 50% of their workforce is minimum wage. And so our campaign is really to improve the life, the economic situation of not only minimum wage workers, but low wage workers. And I'll get into that in a moment. Newfoundland and Labrador currently has the fourth lowest minimum wage of 13 provinces and territories in Canada. We're at $12.15 an hour. We do have a couple of increases coming, but we'll still be under $13 an hour when all is said and done. And our position, like what our campaign is about, is getting as quickly as possible to a $15 minimum wage and then index that to inflation as a good first step toward a living wage. So a living wage is our ultimate goal. A living wage is a minimum wage that's tied to the cost of living in the province. So that would require a lot more work, and to be honest, a lot more fighting and stuff like that between various interest groups and the government. So we feel $15 is an achievable step in the here and now that would improve the lives of people who are working for minimum wage right now. And my position is that our current minimum wage is a poverty wage. And why I say that, I don't care what the low income cutoff is, or the low income measure, or the market basket measure, whatever, they've so politicized the poverty line. My definition of poverty is quite simple. If you can't afford the basic necessities of life, you're living in poverty. It's that simple for me. So let's take a single person working 40 hours a week, not always the case with minimum wage workers, but let's say we have a single person working 40 hours a week at $12.15 an hour. They're earning $486 a week before taxes and deductions, and $25,272 annually. That's their income. I don't know how many of us would be okay living off that. So the average rent of a one-bedroom apartment in St. John's right now is $845 a month, right? $845. So a minimum wage worker working the full time would pay more, well over 50% of their take-home pay, just for rent. And all of the people who talk about budgeting and keeping your expenses in line, they all talk about that 30% benchmark for shelter costs, which, by the way, also includes electricity and heat. So a minimum wage worker working full-time in St. John's renting the average one-bedroom apartment is going to spend almost 60% of their take-home pay just for rent before they heat the place, plug anything in, and all of that, right? So here's why that's a huge problem, is if you don't pay your rent, you get evicted. If you don't pay your electricity, they cut it off. If you don't pay your telephone bill, you get no telephone service, right? So there's a lot of expenses you have in the run of the month that you have to pay. One big area where you can cut, and I know this from growing up in childhood poverty, is what you eat in groceries. That is where you can make huge cuts, because there's a big, huge difference between eating healthy, lots of fruits and vegetables and all of that kind of stuff, or eating what you eat if you're trying to eat as cheaply as possible. And so it's not surprising that food insecurity, we have one of the highest rates of food insecurity in Canada, here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, food insecurity, if you don't understand that term, that's a lack of access to adequate amounts of nutritious, safe, and culturally appropriate food to maintain a healthy and active life. That's Food First NL's definition of food insecurity. And they will tell you that easiest way to fix food insecurity is a living wage. Number one wage. We could eradicate most food insecurity in this province just with that. We also know that there's long-term health consequences to this, to not eating properly and everything. And that is why income is the number one social determinant of health. The medical professionals know this. Study after study has shown this. It's the number one. If you want to say what's going to show us who's going to have good or bad health outcomes, the number one thing you can look at is their income. And then the last point I would point out about living in poverty on this minimum wage is this aspect of social participation. It's not just about affording the basic necessities of life. It's about participating in what everybody else is participating in. I'm not talking about Mediterranean cruises or anything like that. But I'll give an example. When I was a kid in grade 4 in Vancouver, all the kids in Vancouver citywide went to this 1-week camp at certain times during the year. Me and some other kids in my grade, in my school, we couldn't go because the cost was too high for our parents who were poor. So we didn't get to participate in something as basic as that. So I'm talking, or, a family just going out to dinner once a month or something like that. So social participation is something else that I think is a sign of poverty. So when you look at our minimum wage, 90% of Canadians live in jurisdictions with a higher minimum wage. 63% of Canadians live in a jurisdiction with a significantly higher wage, so at least $14.25 an hour or more. And in our province, we had in 2019 a workforce of 208,900 people, so almost 209,000 people working here last year. 9,900 workers out of that were earning minimum wage or less. 48,900 of those were earning $15 an hour or less. So those are what the province classifies as low wage. So our campaign is really to improve the life of almost 48,900 workers in this province. And that's 23% of the workforce, so almost 1 in 4 workers. That's how pervasive our poverty level minimum wage is. So I don't know, like within the province, I can say that our poverty level minimum wage is intentional government policy. Some people, think I'm being too harsh there, but Section 30 of the Labor Standards Act requires that the government reviews the minimum wage every 2 years. So every 2 years, the government can fix this, and they choose not to. So therefore, it is intentional government policy. 91%, Nate just did a poll where they included a question on our behalf, and 91% of respondents in this poll supported a $15 minimum wage. So it affects almost a quarter of our workforce. It's supported by 91% of the people in this province, but the government intentionally every 2 years refuses to deal with this. So that's what our campaign is about, is to try to force the government's hand and get them to address this issue.
Mark, and I guess to like COVID-19, the whole pandemic is really, I think, been one of those things that's really shifted public opinion on this. I think the experience, and probably here in Newfoundland too, it's been the double whammy of Snowmageddon, in the metro area anyways, and then the pandemic right on the heels of that, where you had most of the essential workers that were out there working during the shutdown of the city of St. John's, and then the shutdown of the province, and really the whole country. You had minimum wage essential workers out there keeping everything going. And I think COVID in particular really opened people's eyes to the injustice of that's not right. I remember back in the early days of COVID, we had our sign out front, read, "Blessed are the low minimum wage essential workers, for they deserve a living wage." To date, that sign, the picture that we posted on Facebook, has been viewed, it's creeping up on 150,000 times, shared hundreds and hundreds of times. I think it's, the change is in the air. Like, people recognize that we just can't keep treating workers this way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. We had a survey done back in 2018 that showed 87% in support of a $15 minimum wage, and that's now up to 91%. So I think that COVID has had an impact on people seeing the invisible workers, right? Because nobody paid attention to these folks before. And then, during COVID, where you and I were able to stay home, I know my time at St. Mark's was finished, but I was able to stay home and receive CERB. But, what if these folks had all stayed home?
Right.
And receive CERB? Where would our food have come from? We have to eat or we die, right? So these folks were essential workers, and that did so at great risk to themselves during the lockdown in COVID, and that threat has not gone away, and they're still there working. So I think it's made a lot of people kind of see people who were invisible before.
And that's one of the things, the side effects of COVID. It was the great revealer, right? It unmasked things that we were not willing to acknowledge. And COVID came along, and now we just can't ignore this anymore.
No.
Right?
No.
Now, I know there's probably some people who might be watching now or will watch this later on and will ask, what role, what business does the church have of sticking its nose in this kind of what could be interpreted as political stuff? Like, who is the church to be advocating for anything like this? What would you say to that?
If the church, well, first of all, I'm going to say, if the church doesn't, what's the point of the church? Right? This word, the church can't be political. That's bunk, because Jesus and his preferential option for the poor, he was being political. Jesus was political in a number of different ways, including challenging the prevailing over overarching economic and political system. His overturning the tables in the temple was an overtly political act. So I really shudder when people say, oh, Christians can't get political. Partisan, yes, that's different, right? You don't have the church backing a particular political party. I find that, a bit much, because it's not about parties, or as the Reverend Dr. William Barber II likes to say, it's not about left and right. It's just about what is morally right and what is morally wrong, right? And exploiting human beings, whether it's for profits for a corporation or for us to have cheap stuff, is just morally wrong from a Christian point of view. Anybody wants to take me on that? I'm ready. I'll go 15 rounds. So, I mean, if we can't say that our baptismal vow to respect the dignity of every human being is not tied up on, well, how do you treat somebody with dignity when they can't afford to live on what they're getting paid, right? And there's tens of thousands of workers in this province who can't afford to live on what they get paid. And when we're supposed to challenge injustice, we're supposed to strive for kingdom values. Well, I'm sorry, the exploitation of human beings for their labor is has no place in the kingdom. So if the church, like, there's so many people, and as you know, it's one of the reasons I stepped away from parish ministry, because I wanted to get in the trenches with those people and fight various forms of injustice. The people out there, like, they see the church as a non-entity in fighting social injustice, this being one aspect of that, because we're too afraid to be political, right? So we're about nothing. We pray about stuff. We'll form a committee about stuff. We'll, make a liturgy about stuff. But to get up off our knees, what's that?
We'll strike a committee.
Yeah. But to get up off our knees, so I know I'm being facetious here, but we need to move past praying for God to make all the bad stuff go away. Get up off our knees and offer ourselves as vessels through whom God will make the bad stuff go away. So that's where I am.
Yeah. And in our tradition, the Anglican tradition, we follow the lectionary cycle and the calendar, the Sunday school kids call it the circle of the church year. But in particular, like, say in the later part of October and November, as we move through like the tail end of the season after Pentecost, which is like winds up the church year, Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, the readings were about how life in the kingdom has everything to do with how we treat other people, and in particular, how we treat the most vulnerable people around us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if we don't take care of those people, we cannot say that we are a part of God's kingdom.
No.
And that came to a climax with Reign of Christ Sunday, where we have that parable, the separation of the sheep and the goats, where Jesus says, you who, took care of the poor and the hungry and the imprisoned and the naked, you did it to me. Those of you who didn't do it, you didn't do it to me, right? Lays it out pretty, pretty bare. Like, and usually, like with parables and Jesus, he kind of talks in there's a bit of innuendo sometimes, and you almost have to, pick it apart to kind of get at what he's saying. But there, he's being pretty blatant. Like,
yes, I know.
Right? I don't know, what kind of hermeneutical gymnastics you have to do to get around that one. But then also, as we now move into the season of Advent, like this Sunday will mark the beginning of the season of Advent. And this year in particular, I can't help shake the feeling that Advent, it's a time of waiting and preparation, and we're waiting not just for the baby Jesus to show up, but we're waiting for, the return of King Jesus. But I can't help but shake the feeling this year that Advent is about not us waiting for God to show up, but God waiting for us to show up, for us to do something. And if you look at some of the readings that we're going to use in Advent, they're pretty radical readings. Like John the Baptist, calling for people to get ready for the coming kingdom, and, selling their cloak and changing their lives and turning everything upside down. Mary is going to sing the Magnificat, right? I mean,
Yes.
probably no more political piece of scripture in the entirety of the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. And so it's kind of hard baked into that whole season, right? That we are to be a people of justice, fairness, kindness, compassion. That we should be making a difference in the lives of people who are vulnerable and hungry and poor. And so to me, it makes perfect sense that we would do something,
Yeah.
right?
I always struggle with this idea of just how so many people were drawn to Jesus, right?
Mhm.
Very much drawn to him, not just, religiously observant Jews, but other people as well, people that society would cast aside. And if we as the church are called to be Jesus to the world around us, why are people not being drawn to us?
Yeah.
Why do I find so many people who are out there fighting the good fight against social injustice do not see us as an ally? That weighs heavy on my heart all the time. And when they do see us, we're standing outside an abortion clinic, right? We're not, or we're like,
Yeah.
we're protesting who can be married and stuff like that. Like I just dream of a day when people who are fighting for a more just and sustainable world will just see it as natural that we would be walking alongside them. But until then, I guess I'm just going to be out there. I think like kingdom values are what we're supposed to be about as a people. And you're talking about Advent and God waiting for us, like waiting for us to get ready for the coming kingdom, and we do that by preparing the world for kingdom values. So
Yeah, and it's disappointing that, we in the church, we tend to be more concerned with our own survival as an institution, as, a parish, keeping a building going, than we are with low-waged workers, people living in poverty, people who have food insecurity, right? And maybe Advent now is the time for us to refocus our attention onto what really matters, which would be the
yes,
kingdom of God. And I like to say the kingdom of God,
right.
that we're all connected. We're all brothers and sisters, and we're all responsible to each other. We're not just in this for ourselves and, to pad our own bank accounts and retirement funds. This is a joint effort. It's the
Yeah.
human family. So that's all fine and dandy, all that, theological stuff that we're talking about there. But what can we do? What can we tangibly, practically, realistically do that will make a difference for the workers that we're talking about?
Well, for us here in Newfoundland and Labrador and across Canada, um, uh, we really it's asking everybody of their own volition to do certain things. You don't get massive uptake, right? When I look at things like taxation, I see that as enforced sharing, right? Legislated sharing, because we won't do that on our own. And so, really, if we want to address this issue, like if I was a small business owner and a Christian, I would really have to challenge my own views about how I pay my own employees. There's that, right? So I would say to anybody there who is a small business owner, challenge yourself as to what, how you're treating your workers. But for the rest of us who don't have that kind of ability to change things, we need to call on government can do it. Government can do this very simply, very quickly. They're the ones that set minimum wage. So the number one thing I think we can do as citizens of this province is become a thorn in the flesh of your MHA. I don't think there's anything bigger that you could do than that, is that and the number one thing I can think you can do to start being a thorn in the flesh of your MHA is to write them a letter telling them how you feel about this, that you want to see a $15 minimum wage and why you want to see that. And I would suggest to people, don't email them, but actually write them. You can use a template letter. That's fine, but it's better when you tweak it, if not put it in your own words, because it has more influence, but mail it to them as a letter. There's your starting point. Then you can follow up with phone calls, and every time you see them, hopefully they shudder when they see you because they know you're going to be on their butt about a $15 minimum wage. But start off with that letter to your MHA. Whether they're in the governing party or not, this is really important, that the politicians know that this, they see that number 91%, but 91% aren't going to do anything about what they feel. We got to move past feeling bad for Dominion workers. We got to move past concern into an action. And writing a letter is a huge action that you can take.
Yeah, so it is in that spirit that St. Mark's is very pleased to partner with 15 in Fairness for a good old-fashioned letter writing campaign. And so what we're encouraging people to do during the season of Advent, in whatever way works for you, if you feel you have the time and ability to write every day of Advent to the Premier and to the Minister of Labor, who right now is Jerry Byrne, and also to your MHA, who for me would be Chess Crosby. Write every day. We will provide a template letter, like Mark just said, that you can tweak for your own use. Make it as personal as possible. Maybe you want to, talk about your own experience. Maybe at one point you were a low-wage worker and you know what that feels like. Or maybe you grew up in a home that lived that way. Or, make it as personal as possible. So we will provide that. I'll say a little bit more about that at the end. Maybe all you can do is one a week for the season of Advent, but just anything so that, like Mark says, we're putting pressure on elected officials who really have it within their power to make a difference. But if we don't put pressure on them to exercise that power, it won't happen. So in reality, we're the ones with the power.
Yeah.
Right? We are the ones with the power. And it's time for us to make some noise, ruffle some feathers, and put some pressure on the people who can really make a difference about this. So write every day, write once a week, write as much as you can, again, to the Premier, Minister of Labor, your MHA, and talk about this stuff on social media too. I know my next question to Mark is going to be about, other things that we can do in addition to the letter writing campaign. But, just be as public as possible. Mark mentioned earlier that there's going to be a provincial election in the not too distant future. When, people come knocking on your door looking for your vote, one of the first things we should be saying is, what is your stance on a livable wage for people? Do you support an increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour? Those kinds of tactics that we can use as well. So Mark, is there anything else besides this letter writing campaign that we can do to continue to put pressure on elected officials?
Well, yes, we have a couple of things, the 15 in Fairness campaign that we're doing, and I certainly would tell people your number one thing is the letter writing, by far. But we have a petition that we're getting signatures on. We did do an online petition, and those names are not going to be forgotten. But in order for a petition to be presented in the House of Assembly, it has to be real ink signatures, right? It can't be an online petition. So we will include those other names in behind the signed petitions, but right now we're getting signatures on a petition, and we're going to be doing that over the longer term. But we will have one of the parties present. The NDP has already indicated to us that they would be willing to present petitions if we present them. So that's one thing, is that because I'm trying to be out and about in different places, giving people the opportunity to sign. So you can do that. And then the other thing is we have a social media campaign right now. I'm just going to wheel back here for a sec to grab a sign there. Hang on. So we have kind of sign, or this one, we got whiteboards. When we go out to some places, we get people to like, you know, finish the sentence there. But it's our, I support a $15 minimum wage because campaign. And then what we ask people to do is, you know, and you don't have to use this marker board sign. The best one I've seen so far is a young woman who had 2 scraps of paper. I support a minimum wage because ... And then she had her reason down here on this piece of paper. And then you share this picture on social media, especially Twitter, and you tag the Premier, Minister Byrne, Ches Crosby as the leader of the opposition, Alison Coffin as the leader of the NDP, and also your MHA. And that way, like on their social media feed, their staff is continuously seeing this. And when you share it, if you tag us at 15 in Fairness NL, we will also share it and it'll get huge reach. It just keeps the issue in people's minds. And it's another thorn in the flesh of the politicians because a lot of them don't like being embarrassed on Twitter, right? So it lets them know that this is an issue with you. So that's just a couple of ways that you can be involved other than a letter writing campaign.
So in that spirit, as another part of our Advent partnership, next Friday, December 4th, from 12 to 1 p.m., and we might be convinced to stick around a bit longer if your lunch break doesn't line up with this, but myself and Father Mark, force of habit, will be here in the parking lot of St. Mark's with the petition that Mark just talked about for a drive-by petition signing. So we don't have to gather, you know, in big numbers inside. We'll be outside. You drive up. You can bring your own pen, but we will have some pens around properly sanitized for you to sign the 15 in Fairness petition that we just mentioned. So this is another tangible way that we as Christians, as Anglicans, as followers of Jesus, can make a difference in the lives of people. So 2 things. Letter writing campaign, and we're also going to join with them in the signing of the petition. And I'm sure both of us could be convinced that if next Friday doesn't work, we could do another one at some point so that as many people as possible can sign this. Once we're done here, I'm going to be posting a Facebook event for this whole campaign. And so you can connect that way. And so this video will be in there, you know, form letter that we talked about, addresses that would be relevant, both mail and email. We know we would prefer if people wrote a physical letter and mailed it. But we also, you know, if you want to, in addition to that, send emails too, that would be great as well. Anything, like Mark said, that's a thorn in the flesh to political leaders is welcomed. And we'll also share other information on there about 15 in Fairness and their campaign and the work that they're doing, but also, you know, other relevant news items and links to things that you can get better informed about this stuff too, because I'm sure some of the stuff that Mark talked about at the beginning, people just were not aware of because we don't pay attention to these things. So get your typing fingers ready or your handwriting, you know, hand ready, however you communicate through letter writing. And let's see if we can get as many people as possible writing as many letters as possible to advocate for the increase in the minimum wage in Newfoundland and Labrador to $15 an hour as a start. As a start. This is not where we want to end, but at least it's a start for people that can make their lives better, more bearable, more joyful, more full. Mark, anything you want to say before we go?
No, I thank St. Mark's for taking this on as an Advent project. I think it's very fitting for Advent. This is very timely as we head into an election, that we make sure that this is an election issue, and that those 48,900 workers across this province who earn 15 or less that there's people fighting on their behalf to allow them to better be able to make ends meet and participate in life more fully, and certainly have more human dignity.
I just noticed a comment on our Facebook feed that Sharon, who's in Gander, is wondering what she can do in Gander. Well, she can take part in the letter writing campaign from wherever. But Mark, what can she do about the petition?
I will be up in Gander on Saturday, December 5th. We're going to be in front of Minister Haggie's constituency office, collecting signatures on the petition, offering people the opportunity to participate in the photo social media campaign, and I'll be there to answer any questions, and I'll even give you a 15 in Fairness button if you come out. So that's Saturday, December 5th in Gander, in front of Minister Haggie's constituency office. I think that's 133 Airport Boulevard, and we'll be there from 12 to 2. Now, unless with COVID, something happens where we're not allowed to do such a thing, but we will be doing that. It's outdoors. We'll be wearing masks and following, physical distancing and things like that.
Perfect. And Mark, we'll make sure that gets posted in our Facebook event site that we're going to post too, just so people know. Okay. Thank you so much, Mark, for being here today, and looking forward to it.
Well, thank you again for having me.